I want to turn the floor over to my wonderful friend and colleague, Marina Gorbis. She is a futurist by training. She's also a Cal grad. We love her for that. She did her undergrad degree here and also has a master's degree in public policy. Where Henry is from, she's gone on to a number of illustrious roles, and she is now leading the Institute for the Future in Silicon Valley, a very, very successful think tank, and she has a new book out called The Nature of the Future, Dispatches from the Social Structed World. Marina Gorbis.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's great to be here. So at the Institute for the Future, we think systematically about the future, not because we think that anybody can predict the future, but the purpose of what we do is help people make better decisions by engaging them in future possibilities, in imagining the future and the possibilities of the future to help them make better decisions today. So as we're doing work in many areas on the future of education, on the future of philanthropy, of the future of health, we realize that governance is an absolutely critical issue. Whatever subject, whatever topic area you can think about, governance is actually really critical. So a couple of years ago, my colleagues and I, we founded, and Bettina is here, my colleague, who is one of the participants in this, what we call the Governance Futures Lab, with the idea that we haven't changed our system of governance for centuries now, and it's about time that we started thinking about alternative models and alternative designs and experimenting with governance design ideas and really thinking about governance systematically. So we founded this Governance Futures Lab, and what we believe, kind of the meta story of how we think about the future, and this is in the book, is that there's kind of, we're like existing along two curves. One is what we call the incumbent curve, where we have institutions, we have organizations, we have regulations and principles, we know how it works, but this way of doing things is all kind of on its way out. And at the same time, we're seeing sort of emergence of new ways of organizing, new ways of creating value, new ways of governance. And when we think about it, what is the larger story? To us, it's about this. It's about we're moving from the world of what we call institutional production, where all the value, all the resources were flowing through large institutions. All of the creation was basically done through those. Whether you can think about corporations or you can think of educational institutions, you can think of government systems and others, into this other mode of production, other mode of creation that I call social structured creation. And basically the definition of this, it's about creating value through micro-contributions by large networks of people using social tools and technology. We're seeing it in media, we're seeing it in entertainment, we're seeing it in education, we're seeing it, best example of that is probably Wikipedia, and we're seeing that in governance, beginning to emerge in governance. So the one thing to remember about this sort of new curve is that we don't think of the future, we're not passive bystanders to the future. The future doesn't just happen to us. We have a lot of agency in terms of shaping how that curve emerges. So when Henry talks about all these negatives and all the problems with participatory platforms, to me are ways that we can think about how do we overcome them? How do we create systems and design this new generation of systems that actually prevent these problems from occurring? And when we think about governance and what we see as sort of social structured governance, there are four sort of key drivers that we see emerging that's going to be reshaping governance as we know it, whether we like it or not. And again, this is a way for us to think about what can we make with these forces, what can we design that capitalizes and that these forces are enabling. So one of these things that the four forces are what's happening with data. And, we're hearing a lot about NSA and all the data collection that the government is doing, and absolutely huge concern and something we need to think about and worry about. But at the same time, what we're not seeing and what we're not talking about is that how much of that data we ourselves are collecting on ourselves, on our communities, on our health, on our environments, on our watersheds, on all of this. Just examples of that. This is something, we're all carrying these devices, right? They're all data collection devices. They're all survey devices. They're all research devices and tools. And we're carrying multiple. This is something that was done in the city of Paris. This is called City Pulse, where people were carrying this watch-like device and they could measure the quality of their air in their environment. And that gave them tremendous amounts of data. You think about all the other things that we're collecting data, and people are collecting data on their watersheds, on the crime in their communities. People are creating community maps, which are not maps given to them by the government. These are maps that they're creating of the stuff that they care about and they can act on. So, and this is where you know all about the quantified self. It's all about that. People collecting their own health data, and they're aggregating their data, and they're seeing new patterns, and they're seeing new ways, new things about themselves and their communities. So data, and the data increasingly moving from institutions into people's hands, is one part of that story. That's one of the big drivers. The other thing is that, for better or worse, we are creating these smart systems, smart intelligence systems that are becoming our partners. You can think about Amazon recommendation systems and other kind of algorithms that are kind of becoming extensions of how we think and what we do and where we go. And there may be very silly ones like the budget system, the Budget Hero, which allowed you to basically play with the budget. One of the things, as I was listening to you, Henry, is to think about, yes, so people don't make good decisions on these systems because they're not educated. But how do you build that education into those systems so people can make more intelligent decisions? Why is this not part of our K through 12 education, where what's the best way for kids to learn math than to do budgets, right? So how do we build that education component into these systems? And then we have more sophisticated systems where you can figure out what's the best energy source for your area, and to quite sophisticated systems. This is something from the EU where they're collecting tremendous amounts of data, where you can run scenarios. So you can think about, okay, if we've introduce this policy, or if we did this, or we introduced this budget sort of constraint, what would happen? And these are not ideal, and models are created by human beings, and they have biases and assumptions too, but they're better probably than what we've got now. And these systems are becoming much more sophisticated. And then we have all kinds of engagement platforms. So the California Report Card is a great one. There's a lot of others. We use a platform called the Foresight Engine, created by another Berkeley grad, Jane McGonigal, and a mentee of Ken's, which engages people in thinking about the future. And this was actually used in New Zealand, in Christchurch, after an earthquake, where people got together online and talked about how they can rebuild Christchurch and what they can do. So that's just one element of it. And finally, we have these platforms and tools for people, citizens, to engage in actual provision of services. So you probably all heard about this app that was introduced by the San Ramon Fire Department. It's a CPR app, which allows anybody who has CPR training to download the app. And if somebody is having a heart attack, it can locate the closest person with CPR training to that, to whoever is having a heart attack, to basically provide that service. 15 minutes of somebody's time. By the way, when they introduced this app, the requests for participation in CPR classes just skyrocketed. So people are actually looking for civic engagement. And we have all these spare cycles and spare moments of our 15 minutes here, 20 minutes here. I think the thing we need to be asking of those platforms is, how do we build mechanisms? How do we design them for this education and for participation, that we can all participate in the affairs of the state? So at as part of the governance lab, one of the things we did a couple of years ago, 2 years ago, we created this Reconstitutional Convention, where the original Constitutional Convention had 55 representatives, so we invited 55, I think 60 came, scholars, constitutional scholars, historians, programmers, designers, and others, to really think about what, if you were designing governance systems today, with today's set of tools, today's set of knowledge, today what we know about science, what kind of systems would we create? It's probably an easier question to ask for in some countries that don't have any governance system. And that's why we have a project called Leapfrog Democracy, where it's kind of easier to create these governance systems de novo. But we engage people in thinking, how would you design? What kind of design paradigms will you use? And the first question we asked the participants is, what are the values you want to instill in those systems? Because we all have embedded values in whatever designs we put in. So that's a really core question to start with. And as part of it, this is a group that met at the Institute. And as part of it, we also designed a design toolkit for governance that one of our participants took on the millennial train. And it's a train that went from one coast to the other with a bunch of millennials doing projects along the way. And she stopped in every community this train stopped at. She used this toolkit to engage the local community in thinking about governance systems in that community. So spreading that word to others. So to me, what I just want to say is that as we think about the future, I do think we're moving into a completely new paradigm from institutional sort of power to this new kind of social structure, much more emergent and much more unpredictable in some ways. But we have to think about these design principles and what do we build in, what kind of values we want to instill, and what kind of designs do we want to put into the system.
Terrific.
Thank you.